projects. And I said, these are so ugly. Let me go ahead and help you out. So I'd spend about 20, 30 minutes just jumping on a Figma, slapping some things on the page, and we're like, how's this? And then like, that's so much better. So Tony and I started talking, and he asked me to go ahead and present. And I thought we'd kind of run through the process of being a UX UI designer. And then we'd also, I have a freelance pro bono client that we're going to be talking about. So I went through the process of like designing users, designing, creating a mood board, picking out color palettes, filling out fonts, and then we're talking about how I choose those things. And then we'll jump into the actual Figma portion of this. So before I get started, is anyone in this presentation actually a UX UI designer or a graphic designer? And then you can respond in the comments or like make a reaction. And then is anyone and then who is actually a developer? I don't know if we can get like a majority. Okay. So I think most people in this presentation are going to be developers, and that's, I kind of designed it as a very like introductory. So if you are already a UX UI designer or a designer, this might be not relevant to you, but hopefully it is still pretty helpful. So hi, my name is Kim Peters. I'm an art director and designer living in Chicago, Illinois. I work for a company called Elevation Advertising, and it's based out of Richmond, Virginia. And I've been with them for about 4 years, and I've been a designer for about 5 or 6 years. I have a BFA in graphic design from Virginia Commonwealth University with an emphasis in graphic design. I also do UX and UI as a part of my job function, but it's really just one of the many roles I end up playing at Elevation. Sorry, I don't have a website right now, so I can't show you any of my work. I work with a multitude of brands on all aspects, including web, social, brand, and print, and paid media. So this means I work with designers, developers, illustrators, photographers, chefs, food stylists, production designers, copywriters, and clients to execute creative vision that is consistent with brand's voice and objectives. So this can mean a number of things. So in the past 1 to 2 years, I've designed and executed over 1,000 social stories and feed posts. I've been on 32 photo shoots. I've designed 150 pieces for paid media, and this is anything that is animated, any digital ads that you're getting served when you're shopping for shoes or a car, anything like that. I've designed trade show booths. I have ads for print media. I've been on 5 brand identity projects, and then I've had over 50 plus pieces of printed items. All right, so that's a little bit about me. So why does design matter anyways? I think we all can very easily tell the difference between what is good design and what is bad design. But at the core, design helps establish trust and integrity. I think good design understands its audience. It's the first impression on a user, and it's often the difference between this is cool, and this seems really sketchy. If you've ever gotten an Instagram ad and clicked on it, and then the website doesn't really seem like it's all the way there, you're gonna be like, okay, this might be a scam. So how do we establish trust through design? And that has a lot to do with UX and UI. So UX is user experience. UX designers are looking at the path the user takes. They are meticulously routing users to a path of least resistance. They help identify and resolve pain points when it comes to developing a product. UX designers are often performing research and conducting user interviews to determine best practices and function. And I think when we're thinking about UX design, we're thinking about a lot of like web-based products like Spotify solely exists on the web. The product is the music. It's like, are you listening to a podcast? Are you looking for new music? Do you just want to exist in all the different playlists that you've already created? But in reality, a grocery store is a user experience. How do you navigate through the grocery store? What gets placed on what shelves? Those are all decisions UX designers might be making decisions on. So what is user interface design? So UI designers are handling all the visual information. They're helping to determine color palettes, fonts, and layouts. They ensure brands are consistent and visually appealing. And I think when you're thinking about UX UI, this is typically what you're thinking of is really the visual appeal of a website like Spotify or Instagram or like even your McDonald's or Wendy's. All right, so can you do both? Absolutely. Depending on where you work and what you do, you may be performing the role of both a UX and UI designer, or you might just be playing the role of UX or UI. Sometimes when you're looking at job descriptions, you might see things like product designer or web designer, and those could also encompass the function of a UX and UI designer. All right, so let's go ahead and walk through the process and what it looks like. So we're going to start with our timeline. So typically, when you're getting a project, you don't really have to design the logo, the color palette, the fonts. That's already being determined for you. You're just getting handed brand guidelines, and then that's what you can kind of make all your decisions about the website or how the website is going to look or whatever product you're designing. And then phase 3 would be developing it. But for today's purposes, the client we're working on doesn't have an identity of any sort. So typically the process would be you do discovery, you'd ask a bunch of questions, we'd do a market analysis, kind of looking about like what is already happening in the market, how can we stand out from the crowd. We do user profiling, and then we do brand discovery, gathering all our inspiration, and then we execute it, present that, they choose a final direction, and then from there we would move into actual website development. All right, so our client today is a pop-up food cart based in the Orlando, Florida metropolitan area, launching in 2023 in local farmer markets. So the brand is called Crispy. The name is a little bit TBD based on like trademarks and legal and things like that. But I have a friend who's always wanted to start a food cart and then eventually do a food truck and then eventually do a actual storefront. So this is just his way of like getting into the biz. So I told him I'd actually design a brand and then bring it to life for kind of like the purpose of this presentation. So my friend Tyler, he plans to have menu items based from the $6 range to the $15 range, and the typical spend would be about $38 after tax and tips. And this is estimating that the normal buyer would buy about like 2 meals altogether. All right, so Tyler would use the following words to describe his brand. He thinks his brand is fun, it's funky, it's vintage inspired, it's gourmet, it's juicy, it's bold, it's tasty. Also note that Tyler is a huge basketball fan, so all the descriptions on his menu are going to be sports related. And this brand is also Black owned. I think that's really important to recognize how that's going to translate when we're designing the brand and the language that we're using and that the language that Tyler really relates to. All right, so Tyler's needs. Tyler needs a fun and bold brand that will stand out from the current market in his area. He needs a brand identity and a brand voice. He needs printed assets like signage and a menu and a website to share his location and also his menu as well. So today we're mostly going to be addressing the website portion of that, and then we're also going to be addressing a little bit of the mood board and more of like the brand look and feel. All right. So we are now going to talk about his average customer and what that might look like. A lot of times in UX and UI design, you're going to be asked to develop users. This is typically based on market research. Who is your average consumer on Spotify? Obviously, Spotify can be for anyone, but who is the person using it most, or who is the person going through the car wash the most often? How can we target them and make this brand the most relatable to them? So user personas represent a typical user of a website, product, or app. It gives a deep understanding of the target audience and helps direct designers to create products that address a user's need. All All right, so our first persona is Jonah. He's age 38 and he's a journalist. Jonah is someone who frequents the farmers markets often. Jonah has tried crispy before and he loves it. Sometimes Tyler isn't always at the farmer market he goes to, so they're hoping to find where else he is in town. This user isn't on Instagram often, so they don't think to follow Tyler on social media. This user values high quality groceries and is willing to spend more, especially when they have a personal connection to the brand. However, they aren't willing to leave a 10 to 15 minute radius of their home. Uber Eats and DoorDash is their best friend since they have small kids at home. Taking the dog to the farmer's market is the only way to escape the madness back home. Jonah typically orders in 2 to 3 times a week and spends about $15 to $25 per meal if he's eating alone. So I think this really indicates like who is Tyler going to be interacting with on the everyday basis. This person is already one customer that already loves Tyler's brand. So we're just like reconnecting them through the website. All right. So our second persona is Haley. She's age 23 and she's an account manager. Haley stumbled across Crispy after she saw a TikTok from a local food blogger. She is a self-certified foodie and is dying to get her hands on a Crispy Sammy. Haley doesn't frequently go to the farmer's market, but will make a trip for anything that is Instagram famous. She recently got a full-time job and most of her spending goes towards eating out. Being her friend is easy since she always has a reservation booked. Haley always looks at the menu ahead of time since she has a peanut allergy. Sometimes if they don't have ingredients listed or specify the oil they use, she calls ahead to the restaurant to verify. She often skips out on fried food joints or Chinese since she's had allergic reactions in the past. This user prefers food to be an experience. She loves socializing while eating. Nothing is worse to her than making ramen at home and eating it in front of the TV. So when we're designing our website, we're going to keep these two personas in the back of my mind and say, okay, would these two people eat at Crispy and would they be involved in like the process, or does this look like a place Haley and Jonah both would shop at? All right. So from here we have our user values. So our user values high quality ingredients and brand loyalty. They love eating at Crispy and chatting with Tyler while they wait on their food. They love that the food is fast but also delicious. Our users aren't typically health conscious but are active in their everyday life. So kale salads aren't really their everyday meals. And we don't really need to be making like the grilled chicken sandwich with a lettuce bun. So that's not our market. All right, so our different pain points that I've come up with is not knowing where and when Crispy is located is frustrating to a user. The user wants to know what ingredients are used, that the ingredients used are high quality and allergen aware. Downloading the menu is really annoying. They have to re-download it every time they want to look at the menu or go to the site. And then users are hoping to learn if Crispy delivers or perform other services like catering. The site needs to be streamlined since Tyler will be the one managing the site. So he won't have another team or manager. He's kind of like a one-person show right now. All right, so brand look and voice. So I went ahead and did a quick Google search. I just searched fried chicken, Orlando, Florida, and this is what came up. We have a couple of different categories that we're going to go through, but this is kind of like what all the outsides and websites of the places look like. This is what the actual food looks like. And then this is kind of like the 4 different categories that we have. So we have our fast food chain. So those are your typical KFC, Cane's, things like that, Church's Fried Chicken. We have local institutions that people have been going to years after years, and they're really loyal to these places. We have our new semi-high-end Korean fried chicken places, which are super delicious. If you guys have never been to one, I highly recommend it. But they are definitely on the higher price end, and they are more meant to be a sit-down, like casual restaurant rather than a drive-through. So most people are either ordering on Uber Eats or they're going there to eat. And then the other end of it is a high-class Southern. So this is your bottomless mimosa, you're sitting down and you might have drag brunch, and it's more of an experience type meal. And there's other things other than fried chicken being served. All right. So most fried chicken places established in the area are catered to a to-go experience. Customers are either expected to use the drive-through, carry out, or are using apps like Uber Eats. And then on the other end is how we're a little bit different is since Tyler's just starting out, he's going to be in farmers markets that are, and when you think about a farmers market, they're typically for local vendors to sell vegetables, flowers, cheese, local meats, and baked goods. However, there is a rising need for vendors selling coffee, breakfast sandwiches, and lunch items. And then users are using farmers markets less as a marketplace to do your weekly grocery shopping, like maybe how our parents were using farmers markets, and they're more experiential events to enjoy the company of family and friends. The carrots and flowers are just an added bonus. So when we're thinking about farmers markets and how Tyler is creating a space in the farmers market for himself, he is going to be like the only person selling fried chicken there instead of like one of many to-go places people have the option for. All right. So Crispy aims to strike a balance between Southern home-style food and gourmet experiences to satisfy a savvy customer base. So our customers are definitely a little bit price conscious, but they're also willing to pay the extra dollar to get the like premium bacon or whatever they're shopping for. All right. So now we're going to dive a little bit into our mood boards and how those are looking. So we have a variety of images that Tyler and I have both gathered. I sat down and had a discovery meeting with him about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. We pulled a lot of things. He's really inspired by like mid-century modern items. He really likes kind of like your old grocery stores. We looked at a lot of other fried chicken places and we really recognized that they're using a lot of this like red and yellow, and that was something we wanted to stay away from. So we kept this all in mind. And then we also looked at a couple of different websites. So I really liked this Phil's Finest. It had really bold type. It also had pages where maybe there wasn't photography at all, but it's using illustrations. And then we have things like Birdie's, which is in Richmond, which has really great oysters. And then there's another like meat website. So things that are bold and colorful. Oh, and then we have a blank page. So overall, we want bold typography. Eventually, we want hand-drawn illustrations, and we want it to be bright and colorful. All right, so our colors. So this is where I'm going to kind of mix in what we're doing for Crispy, and then also different resources that you can use if you're kind of trying to do a whole design and development yourself as a developer. So selecting a color palette is often the hardest part. Sometimes there are simply too many options. So here are a few resources. So Adobe actually has a color palette maker that you can use. I was playing around with it a little bit today, and honestly, it wasn't my favorite out of all of them, but they have all the different types of color palettes you can have. So you can have a monochromatic, you can have it complementary, and you go through and you kind of pull and adjust these tabs, and that creates your color palette. All right, so there's also this website called like Coolers, and it generates color palettes, and it's a plugin that you can add to Figma. It's super helpful. I would say most of these color palettes are pretty high contrast, like web friendly, and that's another thing you need to consider is web versus print. A lot of the things that look really great on the screen print are not printable, so you have to have web colors and print safe colors in when you're doing your brand guidelines. Also, Pinterest is a really amazing resource. You just type in like retro color palette 1970 and 1,000 things will pop up. You can download what you like and then use the color drop tool to find your color palette. And then Canva is also a free tool. They have a color palette where you can upload an image and then it'll identify all the colors in the images for you, so you can kind of build off of that. Another thing you need to remember when you're doing web design is everything needs to be ADA compliant. So you need to make sure that your type has enough contrast. So yellow type on a white background definitely isn't going to be readable, or black type on a blue background isn't going to be readable. So you're able to kind of plug in your colors, or you can also get plugins, and it'll tell you how much contrast there is between the images and if it would be able to pass an ADA compliance test. All right. For today's purposes, I went ahead and selected a color palette that we saw in our mood boards. I selected a color palette based on these 3 images. Tyler seemed to really like that primary color use, so I just went ahead and used that for today. Okay, 1 second. All right, so this is our color palette we're going to use today, and then we're also going to specify photography because Tyler doesn't have any photo assets. So these are all images from a royalty-free website you can all use called Unsplash. The website is owned by iStock, so it's constantly feeding you like iStock assets that you can buy as well. But you can go through it, and there's some really nice images if you're looking for like a wholesome family to put in the background, or like tech bros working. They would have all the images you would ever want and need there. I also added some really great pictures of farmers markets, so we can actually get a clue and an indication of the environment Tyler's working in, because he's primarily working at farmers markets starting out. All right, and then for typography, fonts have personalities. I think we all know that. They can be super fun and bold. They can be really hard to read. They can be sexy. They can be funky. So choosing your type is definitely the most important thing that you might be doing when it comes to how the website looks and feels, because this is going across the entire website. So some fonts were made to disappear. They're made to be really readable, that you're reading it, you're not even thinking about, oh, that's a cool font, that's not a cool font. Like Times New Roman was designed by the people who make the New York Times, so you can read it really easily, and it has like a mathematical formula to it. Some fonts were made to stand out, and they're really bold, and these are either like display fonts that are only made for headlines. And then obviously always consider readability. Sometimes fonts that have like high contrast to them, they're really hard to read, or a lot of those script fonts you can't really read when it gets down to be your paragraph fonts and things like that. All right, I always recommend people use Google Fonts. It's free, it's web friendly, and it's also language inclusive. So if you have a client that needs things in both Spanish and English and Chinese, it can all be converted, and it's super easy on your end. Here are a list of sans serif Google fonts that I really recommend. Google Fonts is kind of like so big now and expansive. I think there's over 5,000 Google fonts that are all free to use. So here is a short list of fonts that I like to use. And then here is a short list of different serif fonts that you would like, that you might want to use. Obviously, the vibes between this and this are totally different. You're not going to be using this on maybe your new tech startup, but you might be using it if you're doing a website for an author, or maybe like a really cool like plant website or something like that. All right, so the 2 fonts I've selected for today is Tilt Warp to be our headline font, and then Urbanist is going to be our paragraph font. So Urbanist is going to be in anything that's not a headline, basically. So this is how it would kind of look. So headline and then paragraph, and that's just filled with lorem ipsum. So this is a lorem ipsum generator, which is just a basically a placeholder font generator. It's really nice to have lorem ipsum because it kind of mimics language without having to like plug in any information. If you're looking for different types to use, different fonts to use, I would highly recommend being on TypeWolf and checking it out. they kind of do reviews on different free fonts and different trending fonts, and then they'll also recommend, like, if you really like one certain typeface, they'll recommend pairings to use with it. Right. We're not using any icons today, but I know that is something that people always need to know. Flat Icon is a free resource. There's free icons you can download, but if you do their premium subscription, there's a ton of other elements that you can download with them as well. And then Creative Marketplace has a bunch of different display fonts that you can use that are web and print safe. And then they also have a ton of illustrations that you can buy for a pretty affordable price if you're looking for assets for your website. All right, so now we're going to be talking about site maps. So site maps are actually pretty simple at the end of the day. So the one that you're going to be looking at for Crispy is going to be pretty simple, but this is basically just saying, okay, start our homepage. What are all the different tabs that we're going to have, and then how do those pages break down? So it's really just a way to streamline our thoughts and making sure everything we're designing is going in the correct place. All right, so this is our map for Crispy. So we're going to have our homepage, and then on the homepage, I think the top priority should be the location, because it's either people wanting to know where Tyler is or where they can find him. So it's going to be the location first, and then we're also going to have Instagram kind of like at the bottom there, and then we'll have on another page, we're going to have our menu and then allergy information. And then on our last page, we're going to have our story, our contact information, and that's also going to house like extra like catering information if people are interested in having Tyler come to their home or an event. So we're about to jump into Figma. So wireframing is the next step. So this is basically, you're just making a bunch of different thumbnails, and then you're going to be kind of bringing that, laying out all your pages so you can then bring it into Figma or Adobe XD or whatever other program you're using, so you can kind of keep it in mind for and make sure you have all the information you need. Okay. So now we're going to jump over to Figma. Okay. So I've already laid out wireframes with all the information that we might want or need. So we have our headlines, we have our story page, and then we have our menu. So really this website at the end of the day is pretty simple. It's just about plugging and playing. And when we're looking for inspiration, I like to use Site Inspire to look at different websites and kind of get an idea. And this website's really cool because you can sort by style, and then you can also sort by type. So you could do like cafes, bars, and restaurants. So we'll just open a bunch here and kind of see what we like. So this one seems like it's going to be really cool because it has really big type. And you can also sort by, is it going to be super interactive or not? So little GIF intro, and then it has an animation when you come in. So today we're not really going to be addressing any animation or prototyping, but I can show you a few things. Yeah, so there's a color change that happens, which is awesome. Menu, so a lot of things that us as designers, it's definitely a partnership when it comes to development. So you have to be able to communicate, oh, I want it to change. And you can share that visually, but it's also going to be a conversation, a little bit of a back and forth with your developer or whoever you're working with to create the website. So the type on this one is super big. So it's like you're really not knowing what the site is for until you scroll down, which may be a good thing or maybe a bad thing. But this color palette's super simple. It's red and yellow, and then secondary colors would be pink and cream. And then it's just a simple scrolling zone, making me hungry. All right. Cool. So now we have a little bit of inspo. I went ahead in Photoshop and I dragged in all of my free assets, and then I did a cutout on a couple of these elements. So like pickles and lettuce and some chips. So I'm gonna go ahead and just duplicate all of my wireframes, and then we're gonna start skinning this thing. I've never designed live, so let's see how far we get. So typically we'd be obviously starting, we would have our logo, and then these are just like our 3 representatives for our different pages. And the nice thing about Figma is I went through and I already added our colors, and then you can add them to your local style. So you can create a text, a color, or a vector or grid style, and then it always keeps it there. And then let's say if I had, Crispy was already a website and a brand, I could also make an entire library of assets that I could hand off to another designer, or if I had to design something else for Crispy, like a digital ad, all those assets would already be existing, and then I could just kind of keep reusing it. So everything is always to standard, and I never have to worry about it. All right. So I think we're gonna stick with a white background, but I really love this photo, so I'm gonna go ahead and drag it in. And I really would love it. I don't know if it needs to be that big to stand out there. And then when you're working in Figma, you can always demo things. So you'd send a demo link to your client, and then they would be able to comment on it. And then you can also send a demo link to your developer, and it would help hand over all like the CSS information and things like that. Okay. So Tyler was able to provide me some copy. I would recommend anyone work with a copywriter. I think sometimes as like designers, owners, developers, we're kind of expected to do it all, but copywriters are definitely a undervalued asset it has when you're building a brand. So, all right, Crispy's the name, so we'll just say the greatest chicken sandwich of all time. And also the great thing about Figma is that right now I'm working on like the wireframing sizing, but I could also make it reactive, so I could stretch and pull this canvas. So then it would be like mobile size, or it'd be like desktop size. So you can have it auto resize for a number of different screen sizes, which is awesome. All right. So I think for the background, I'm trying to see what a colored background would look like. Or at least, ooh, my shortcuts are different, so let's see. So let's see what red looks like here. So red might be a little bit too angry, to be honest. Yellow could work, but yellow is what everyone else in the market is doing. Green could definitely indicate that we are healthier or that we are at farmers market. So maybe green might work. Blue is cool, but obviously our other type wouldn't be white. So let's see what green is going to do for us. So fill. Drag it up to white. And I did an auto, so in Photoshop, there is a tool where you can auto select, but sometimes the cleanup isn't great. So I would have to go back and then replace these assets later on. The nice thing about working with the Adobe Cloud in general is like if you're working in InDesign and then you edit a photo in InDesign or in Photoshop, and then it would automatically re-link in InDesign. But then sometimes it's annoying because then you forget that's linked, and then if you drag it someplace, it's not that. So let's see what 110 looks like here. And then I'm going to manually control my leading. I think most of the time it goes to auto lead, but manually controlling it is a lot easier, right? And it looks a lot better. So usually the rule of thumb is you want like 2 extra spaces, but let's see what 112 looks like. Right, that's a little bit too much. I want it to be really tight and bold, so I'm just going to bring it down to 100. Okay. And then let's go ahead and we're going to put a placeholder here. So we'll just put logo here. And then when you're working in design, you're always working on a grid for the most part. So a lot of times if I'm designing a print document, I actually have a grid going all over the place so you can see it, and you can turn on a grid in Figma as well. Right now, just for your guys' eyes, we won't have it. So the unfortunate part about Tilt Warp is it only has one option, which is like the regular option, but Urbanist has all, it has like Urbanist Thin, it has Urbanist Black, it has like the whole kit and caboodle. So we'll just go for regular for now. And Urbanist definitely has that mid-century modern feel to it. It's very minimal. And then I would say, if you're designing a website, I'm trying to think about the timeline for you and how long that would actually take. I'll block this and place it after. So I would say I would give myself maybe a week or 2 to fully design a website. And then if you were going to design something top to bottom, like let's say you had a freelance client came to me, like Tyler did, it'd probably take me a week or 2 for discovery, a week or 2 to do like a brand analysis, and then it'd probably take me a month to actually present, a month to a month and a half to actually present Tyler 2 options for his brand, and that would be like logo design and things like that. And then I would present him around. He would pick a direction out of those 2. And then from there, we would begin to move forward. And then I would do brand guidelines. So that brand guidelines would probably take me like a week or 2. And then I would hand over all my assets to him, like all my logos and everything like that, any pictures that he might want to use. And then we'd actually start doing web design. So we're going to put a line in just as like a divider mark, but it may not be necessary. We can kind of just like visually measure. And I think a lot of times when I start designing, things always are too big, and then I go back and I can make them smaller. So, and that's the nice thing if you are adding the different text assets. So it's like this would be our headline 1 right here. If I went and auto updated it, it would actually update it across the board for me. And then you can make different instances, which is really nice. So we're going to make this section white right here. Let's see what that is. I think a lot of times, so now that we have that, we definitely don't need that line. So here I would recommend that when I'm talking to the developer that we use a map plugin here. And then I would have it identify maybe the farmer's market that Tyler usually goes to, or would have like 3 or 4 locations that he's typically at. So then people could click and drag or get directions there. But since we don't have that plugin right now, I'm just gonna insert a photo. Let's see. So Figma has a mask function, which is right here. So you would like put whatever object underneath, and then you can drag it, and then you can also do different types of fit, crop, tile, which would make it repeat itself if you wanted it to. But we're just gonna do fit. And a lot of times when I'm looking at people's work, you'll see them, they'll add like a stroke, and they'll add a drop shadow, and they'll add like something else. I really don't think you need that at all, unless you have maybe it'd be like if I had a headline over this image and I couldn't see it, then I would put a slight gradient over the image, and then I would change it that way. So I typically go through and I lay out all my information, and then after that, I'd be like, okay, how can I make it more fun? And then I'll like kind of duplicate the website again, and then I'll start messing with things. So if I wanted like the lettuce to come above everything, how would that look? Mess up my mask. And the one thing that annoys me a lot about Figma is it doesn't necessarily put everything in your artboards all at once. So you sometimes like this mask group is not technically on the artboard. It was in the like assets panel. So we're gonna have our calendar, and then we want people to know that there's waffle fries. So this is where I think it's like really helpful to have a Figma subscription and a Adobe subscription if you're going to be a designer and a little bit of a developer as well, because you're going to be needing to cut things out, and you simply just Figma doesn't have the capability. I know things like Canva, or there's a lot of different websites you can now use to help cut things out, but it's not that accurate sometimes. Or you get leftover information like all these like white bits here. But for today's purposes, we're just gonna leave it. So here. So maybe that's like one option. Or you're probably like, okay, green is looking good, but he might come back to me and be like, oh, green's really dominant. I really would prefer the whole white background. So then I'll go and we'll look what a second version might look like here. So obviously you have to go through and change text now. So let's make our text red. So automatically, it's the same layout, same everything, but option 1 and option 2 would have a totally different look and feel to it. And on this one, I chose to have all of our headlines be all cap, but that doesn't necessarily need to happen. So this one, we're going to switch it. We're going to make this one, the background a different color. We're going to incorporate our yellow. And maybe this doesn't even need to be a rectangle. Maybe it can be like a fun, like wavy shape, so it like kind of looks more like sauce or something like that. So I'm going to go in for a pen tool. And the pen tool definitely has a bit of a learning curve to it. So I would recommend playing around with it before you start. Let's see how that looks. So give us a stroke, so we're going to add our fill. Fill will be yellow. Get rid of that. And then we'll send this back. And then I'm going to go ahead and play with the shape of this so it looks a little bit more smooth. There's a lot of like different blob generators you can use as well, and they'll auto generate these shapes for you. So I think that's the nice thing about design or anything you do. It is literally just one Google session away. Done with that. And then maybe we're not going to use the square image anymore. Let's go ahead and use this where it's cut out. I'm going to duplicate this shape because I'm going to want to use it later. Let's go ahead and use that as a mask. Right. Put that inside the mask group as well. And then we're going to move that group down. So that's already looking a lot more dynamic. So A to B. So we're still going to keep going through this process. So on this one's like, obviously we kind of like have the shape of the sauce. So on this one, let's see. So we're going to start thinking about, so our calendar, make that a headline. And then you're going to want to determine your button style. So on this one, we honestly don't have too many buttons, but we'll add a call to action for today's purposes. And let's make them really these pillow shapes because that's very mid-century mod. See what the blue button would look like. So maybe we do a blue button. Honestly, that does not have that much contrast to it. So let's see what green looks like. Okay, green's a little bit better. So we'll do a button that says like learn about us or our story. We'll just do our story. All right, so right now you can see I'm like dragging it and the type sits at the bottom, so you can direct where the type sits. So I like it when on buttons, if the type is centered, so then I just match up the text frame to the button itself. And then I'll select both of them. And then there's these tools up here where I'm going to center a line of them. So it's automatically going to center it for me. You can also do like left line, right line, and then so centered is us. So then I'm going to group that. But obviously, if you're on a mobile application, you're not going to have your hover function, but in our case, we will. So I'm just going to duplicate this, and then I'm going to create another button. So I'm just going to make it white with green text. So then when I hand it over to the developer, I have both of them. And then if you're going to prototype this entire website, you could actually make it hover back and forth when we're prototyping. So this type still needs some work. Let's make it 100. So we're also going to obviously want to have our header. So I'm just going to make it white. And then move that down. Center. So I'm going to group that and center this information. All right. And then there is, you're able to, so I'm going to hit fixed position when scroll. So when I share it, or when I preview it, the header is now going to stay with us, which is pretty cool. And I think that really, I've had clients before where we're doing something, they don't understand that this scrolls. So doing some prototyping is really helpful for them. And like maybe we want to add a stroke to help identify this. So maybe that's where. And right now 1, so maybe we get a little thicker. Don't know if it needs to be the whole outline. Honestly, maybe I prefer it just to be a line, but so we're going to remove that stroke actually. So design is definitely a lot of back and forth, and you'll do something and you will sit on it and then you open it back up and you hate it and then you do it again. But that's why I always like duplicate. And the nice thing about Figma is it's a pretty much an infinity canvas, so you can just keep working on it as your heart desires. I think that's 100 as well. So then, so we're thinking about our calendar. So we'd probably say vacation. What it looks like. Okay. So location, date, and time. we are going to evenly spread these, so tidy up. So it automatically puts them together for me. And then we'll group those together. But sometimes tidy up isn't always helpful if you have like extra space at the end of your boxes. So I'm just going to trim those. And I'm going to center it. And then this is going to have to move out of the way. So then I'm still trying to think of like the best way to envision this. So in this case, I'd probably like go and look at different like restaurants I know that do different pop-ups, so I can reference how they are designing or thinking about something. Obviously, things like Squarespace have really good templates already, so you can look at those things and reference it. I think obviously in design and art, you don't want to plagiarize at all, but there is something to be said about referencing someone's work and then giving credit to them when it is due. That did not work out. So even that might be a little more. So ideally, these would all be hyperlinks, so you could like click on them, and it would be like blah blah's brewery is having a pop-up, and you'd click on the link, and it would take you to that website, or it would take you to a Google map. So, and I would talk to my client about that, be like, what is the best? What would be the best for him, and what he thinks would be most useful for his clientele. Things are starting to bump together. So we're going to quickly fill in like the Instagram grid. So to have that, and then probably we'll have, these will also be hyperlinks. So just take them to social media. We're just going to film with random things. So we kind of just get a picture. Group that, ungroup that. So on this particular build, there's probably not going to be any data being fed on this website at all. It's just going to be Tyler manually typing it in, and then whatever plugins that we're using on the map or the calendar, or maybe the calendar element is like hooked up to his Google Calendar or what other system he's working on. So those are just things to keep in mind and thinking about how all those things are going to work together. I think we're coming up on just about an hour, so we'll work for about 5 to 10 more minutes, see where we get, and then from there, I can either design and answer questions, or we can just answer questions, and I can we can share resources and things like that. A lot of design is zooming in and then seeing if things are lined up. So if you've ever had to build a PowerPoint, you know how annoying it is. A lot in my 9 to 5. So I work for a major ham retailer, and we do social media for them. So I design mood boards, and then we work with chefs who design recipes, and then we work with food stylists and photographers, and then that all gets put on social media for them. But then those assets are then used in any digital ads we do, and then they're going to like recipe books and coupon books. So it's really cool to see assets move from like point A to B. And a lot of times we're like, okay, we shot it looks like a great shot, but we need it to be really wide for web use. Because we're always like exporting things at a really high res. A lot of times the images I get handed from a photographer to me are like full raw images that maybe have been touched up, maybe they haven't, and they'll be like 25 to 30 megabytes, and I have to size this down myself. So this Instagram feed would just feed straight into him. So then it would, whenever he posted, this would update for him as well. So let's see what would actually be in the footer. So it would probably have like home, and then it would actually have our social icons. I know Figma has little icons that you can use. Sometimes I like how they look, sometimes I don't. So we're just gonna use little circles for now just to indicate that those would live down there. And they'd be really itty bitty. It's actually really stretched, so 40 by 40, and then we'll lock it so that it can't get stretched. And then maybe some gray. This can be, you want that to be green. We haven't used blue at all, so maybe we'll see how that blue works. Again. Ideally, I would like to use all of these elements in tandem, all these colors in tandem together, but sometimes when you start designing, you're like, okay, I thought that was gonna look really good, and it looks horrible. Set one with little dots, and tidy them up, and align them. Okay, here we go. And I will make those white. So when I actually go to upload all of my icons, so maybe he's on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, maybe it's like LinkedIn, maybe it's like a local food blog like Eater or something like that. So I know I'm going to want to grab all of those assets in white. And then we're going to make this title. It doesn't need to be as big as counter. I don't think it's that important. So also make it red though. So just keeping all of our headlines consistent. It's hard because like this yellow is not, it's more of like a medium tone yellow. So I think black will still have the most contrast for it, but white also has a bit of contrast. So this is something, maybe we'll make it white, but like then I'd go ADA test it, and I don't think this would pass ADA testing, honestly. So still would love a line of some sort. Make that strip. Green. Where'd it go? And then Figma is really cool because you can make assets. So instead of like create components, so I can hit create component, and then it will put it in my assets. So then I can just drag and drop it every time. And I can do the same thing with my button here. So create component, adds it, and now I just have to drag and drop, and then now I can create an instant, so I can say catering, or it can say contact us, or whatever you want to say. But then that is also going to save you time. That's probably like one of the biggest benefits of Figma, is being able to do all of that. I like how that line looks, but now I think this would have, my image would have to move down because I don't like the spacing between those things. A lot of design is also being like, that's too close to this, or that's too far from this. So just giving yourself the time to like, so in reality, I'd probably like lay this all out, not think about it for a day, and then I would come back to it and then I would rework some things. And you can see that now that I put the line there, it updated it in the component. So. And you have to edit the master component for it to kind of go across the board. So select the line. I'm going to beef this line up to about double to 2. See how this looks. So then I would scroll. And then honestly, if we're developing this, I'd probably be like, oh, I wish this yellow would have an animation of some sort, or the hand would pop up. So I'm thinking about those things as I design, but they're not necessarily what exactly. Like when we did the preview, you saw the mass group was there. So that's where it gets annoying, where a lot of these groups kind of escape your artboard that you're working on. I'm just gonna group these all together. They're not moving anywhere. Command G groups it. The next one would be menu. Now that I'm looking at it from far away, so a lot of times when you're like, okay, does the type work? You're gonna look at it from super far away and squint. And then if you can or cannot see it, and it's too small or too big, like if you're squinting at this area, you can hardly tell that there's any type, so that means it's basically the wrong color. So menu, red. We're just gonna color all these lines, but we're gonna keep the type black just for high contrast. Make those green. But 2. And then down here, I have any allergy information. So Tyler can write a statement about we work in like a nut-free facility. I think that goes a long way with a lot of people who have allergies. We used to have a boss who had a gut health issue, and she could only use like certain types of oils, like avocado oil. And she had to call every single restaurant to ask them if she could bring her own oil for them to cook in, or she would have an allergic reaction. So now instead of having to mock that all out again or copy and paste it, I just drag it, which is awesome. Like maybe since our footer is blue, maybe it doesn't need to be white. Maybe it is colored. So you can already see I go back and forth 1,000 times on what it should look like. Now you probably don't need that green stroke. But then now, see, so now my issue is it looks cool that it's blue because I want the blue in there, but it looks like it's cutting off the top of the page. So I'm gonna extend page a little bit. So I can move, I'm gonna move everything down just a hair, give it more space. Let's see what that looks like. I think you'll find with design, you just some of it is intuitive, but sometimes you just need, so that's too much space, so let's cut that out. Sometimes you just need like a friend to sit down with and tell you if something's looking good or a fresh pair of eyes. And honestly, that's the most helpful. People always ask me about going to art school and what if it was worth my time. I always say yes. The biggest thing about art school is you have someone to be honest with you, to tell you straight to your face that something sucks. And then you can swallow that pain and move on. See, I would never make allergy info red because it looks angry. So you also have to think about like those slight connotations when you're working on something. Maybe allergy info also does not need to be a rectangle. Maybe it can be like a fun shape like this again. Like that. We're going to do chicken. Green this time. Down here. Down here. Good layers. And then I would move it down. Cool. All right, so we're about at an hour and 11 minutes. So Tony, I think if you want to open up for Q&A, I can kind of design as we go. If anyone has questions about this design, or we can just move it on to like general questions.
Yeah. And first off, let's give a round of applause for Kim. Really fantastic job. Oh my gosh, like that was amazing. So let's give her a really big congrats on
thank you.
this. This is amazing. This is amazing stuff. So now let's definitely have you kind of answer questions. Looks like a lot of students have questions already, or they might be accidentally raising their hand. But yeah, if you want to have a question, come on, open your camera if you can, and speak up, and then we'll get your questions answered.
Tony, you can call on people if you want.
Oh, yeah. Let's go with, all right, there's Ben. Ben, you want to go first?
Okay, I got a quick one. So which one do you like better, Adobe XD or Figma?
So when I learned to prototype, I used Proto.io for an app design, and that was really difficult because it was like my first introduction. And at that time, XD was a little baby and it didn't have prototyping functions. So, but now XD is really cool. But Adobe just acquired Figma for $22 billion, which I got acquired for $22 billion. So now my company's standard is Figma, and I would say Figma, from my understanding, is industry standard. So I would stick with Figma.
Okay. Perfect. Awesome. Next up is Christina.
I think someone went first, so I think Doreen or someone.
Yeah,
so
Doreen.
I'll just.
Doreen who? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing names here. Doreen who? You want to go first? You had a question?
All right.
Oh, he accidentally.
Okay.
Well, he was an accident.
Okay, I will go ahead and ask. I'm sorry, I cannot be on the camera for technical reasons. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's really awesome to see how other designers just do stuff on the way. It's just wonderful. I have a question. I actually have a couple of questions. First is connected to colors. So in your company work, is there a particular math behind the colors, or do you mostly work on intuitive process and you see how it works? Let's say, because when I designed for the websites and stuff, I tried to understand, okay, so if that's the button, it should pop out. So I try not to use a particular amount of colors, like not more than 3, 4. So tell me more about how it goes in your company.
So in my 9 to 5 life, I'm handed a brand standard and I have to really familiar myself with that. So I can't break fonts, colors, things like that. Obviously, sometimes there are exceptions to those rules. If we're doing like a separate campaign, we can use a different font or a slight variation of the green. Like let's say this green in reality in the font book or is like a super light green. So we'd either have to find a workaway around it or make a recommendation for web. If it's like my personal like freelance work, I can make the judgment call and then I can update it on like my client's end and communicate that change. But I would say in general, I'm working with a predetermined color palette that needs to be executed and I can't just change it. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you. And if I can ask just another question connected to fonts that is very similar, is there the bad practice to use several fonts at the same time? Let's say, I know from some reason from the past, I was always thinking like, okay, so if you use a Montserrat, it should be Montserrat all of the ways. I see, yeah.
Yeah, so I would say typically you're determining, like, let's say one brand, like it could all be urbanist, like the headlines could be urbanist, the everything throughout it. But I would say typically from what I've seen is like you're going to determine two main fonts. One is like a headline font and then one is a body font. When obviously, if you want to go crazy, you can use more than one font, but that's why Tilt Warp is a difficult font to work with because it's only one font style, whereas Urbanist is a whole font family. And I guess that's the difference between a typeface. A typeface includes all the different fonts in it, and a font is like font that is like Urbanist bold or Urbanist black or Urbanist like light italic. So I would say when you're choosing a font in general, I would choose a family, a typeface that has like at least like 5 to 6 different variations within that. So like a light, a regular, a bold, or like in like a black. So like a semi really bold.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Awesome. And can I ask just a last question that is more about your personal experience working as a designer? What is the most painful for you in terms of like still after so many years of experience? What still something that hurts you, let's say, I don't know, if your design is not used or anything like that?
I think when I first started designing, I was like really timid about making like big changes. Like let's say I started with this design and they're like, oh, I want another variation. I would kind of just go in and like move things around. But now I think when I'm presenting or when I'm ideating, I want to present 3 designs that are totally different so I can have a automatic reaction to something. I've been on a couple different types of website builds. I've been on like a food website. I've been on like cigarette and like tobacco websites, which have a whole nother layer to them. I've been on websites that they end up having like hundreds of products on them. So just like, I think after a while, the excitement of the project definitely wears off. So learning to really be like consistent with yourself and then building safe practices so you can easily execute resizing 100 images or 200 images is also really important. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you, Kim.
All right. Thank you, Christina, for asking the question. Anybody else has questions or want to know more? So Doran's just has his hand up. Spencer, did you have an original question? I think I saw your hand up before, but did you have a question beforehand? Okay. I do have a question. For the ones that don't know about A/B testing, can you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
To be honest, I don't have too much experience with A/B testing when it comes to websites, but I do have it when it comes to like social ads. a lot of times we'll kind of like we'll put out an ad into the world and we'll see which one is getting a better reaction. And it could be the same thing for a website. When you log on, maybe you see like one home screen and then another person might log on, you see a different home screen. I think it's less common with websites and it's more common with like products like Spotify or Instagram. Because Instagram, I think everyone is kind of getting served something else, and they're trying to see, especially Instagram now, is trying to see if it's like can compete with TikTok and if it should be pushing like video functions versus a like photo format. And like if you look at the TikTok algorithm right now, TikTok is pushing a like still image carousel function right now. So it's interesting to see when you're on social media. I think those like transparencies are more noticeable.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thomas?
Hi, Kim. I have a quick question. I'm not sure if this is related to the A/B testing or whatnot, but I've seen a lot of different job descriptions out there for front-end developers, UI, UX designers, and things of that nature. And I'm just wondering, at what point do you implement SEO best practices for? Is that in the design patterns, or does that more towards when you get into the coding piece?
I think it's a mixture of things. I would say on a day-to-day basis, I'm not really handling SEO, but we have a digital team that I work with. So a lot of times when a copywriter is getting briefed for a project, they're gonna be like, these are terms you should or shouldn't use, or these are like things that we want to or want not to or don't want to implement. And I think a lot of times it's either you, the developer or front-end web designer, is implementing those things. But me, I'm mostly just like touching like the pure like graphics for the most part.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Thomas. Anybody else have questions? All right, I guess if no questions, I'll let Kim kind of wrap up our workshop. But yeah, I'll let Kim take away for the wrap up here.
Cool. So if you want to learn more or you have a project that you're working on, Tony has a awesome mentorship program through his company. So you can learn from myself, Tony, or 2 other mentors. I know Jonathan is here today. So go ahead and sign up for a learn about mentorships through his website, or you can book a free 15-minute consultation to talk to myself or one of our other mentors. So they cover everything from full stack to development design, front-end design, or UX UI. And if you be doing UX UI, you can talk to me directly.
Awesome. And yeah, and thanks again for Kim for coming along, for presenting this opportunity. Really, thank you, Kim. Again, round of applause for her. Really appreciate it, and thank you for all for coming. And like Kim mentioned, if you're looking with wanting to work with experienced mentors, definitely check out our channel, our website, www.hanawilo.com. We have industry expert professionals that are willing to help you out in terms of what your goals are, whether there's full stack development or UI UX. So Kim Peters is expertise in the UI UX design. So if you're looking to design a portfolio to impress employers, that's for that. Jonathan Waller is one of the other professional mentors that has also several couple of years of experience under his belt on the front end. And so if you're looking for front end expertise, get better at that, that's for that. And I personally focus on the back end development, anything that has to do with Node.js, that's what I do. And then we have another mentor, keep adding on, that focuses on Fang interview questions. And so definitely check that out as well. So if that's a benefit to you, definitely check it out and talk to one of us for additional consultation. So that being said, again, Kim Peters, thank you so much for joining us today. Happy Tuesday evening for everyone for coming along. And so we'll be presenting more of these as we go on through my company. And so definitely follow us on LinkedIn, but also on the Eventbrite website to follow along. And then Kim Peters will definitely be also, there's been more opportunities for workshops like this. And so definitely be on the lookout. Next one's going to be on TypeScript. So definitely be excited for that. And then hope to see you on the next one. All right, guys. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.